Hi everybody. So up to this point, we've been talking about design principles and elements. We've been talking about the importance of infographics and how they're relevant for different audiences depending on their intent. This week, we're going to be talking about structure. So now that you have an understanding of design principles and how they can help you create a strong composition, we're going to start talking about the structure, the overall structure of the infographics. One of the main things that you have to keep in mind is that this structure needs to be defined by the information that you're analyzing or dealing with. So whatever information you want to visualize, you have to first think about what type of information you're using and then how people might perceive that in a graphic way or a visual way. So some ways of thinking about that would be if you're thinking about, let's say, history or a story. Let's say it's the history of humankind. One of those symbols that people have in their minds is a timeline. So history would be represented this way, right? That would be a way of doing that. If you think about cycles, then cycles, we usually connect cycles with circles, right? So it's a continuous graphic, right? A never-ending graphic. If you think about quantitative data, where you're having numbers, percentages, we look at bars that allow us to compare and contrast that information, or line graphs where you plug in your data set. Now, this is like a very simplistic way of thinking about it, but once you start analyzing your information, then you need to start making other decisions. If this history, and it says the history of humankind, I can also change the structure of these and make it horizontal, vertical as opposed to horizontal. So from left to right, this is the way we read in Western. We will start the history here and move forward. Now, if we change the structure and do something that's vertical, then we're adding something else, which would be a hierarchical structure. So whatever's on the top might be more important as whatever is at the bottom, okay? So depending on what's the underlying story, then you would choose which way to go. If what I want to say is emphasize certain moments of that history, maybe having it vertical so we understand that this was the most important moment, and then these other moments happen, then this might be a better structure than this one. If you think about cycles and you think about those circles, depending on the nature of the information, then you can also shift that, right? So it could be a circle, but it could also be something that's not exactly a circle. So again, referring back to sleeping cycles. Sleeping cycles might be better represented as a circle. But if you think about a cycle that's more organic and inconsistent, then you know that the shape shouldn't be so structured. So once you define your structure, you have to start thinking about going back to your audience and intent. So if you think about different audiences, then the style of your graphics are going to change. So if this history of humankind, the audience is going to be adults, then your graphics are going to be different from, let's say, graphics for children, right? So you start thinking about the style that you want to use for each of them. And that would be not only your forms or your graphics, but also your typographic selection, your type treatment. Another thing is once you have the overall structure, when you start plugging in your graphics, Then you have to think about those small details that you're adding. So what would a circle represent as opposed to a square or some other simple shape like a triangle, right? So if you think about people, so let's say in this history of humankind, we're representing different stages, but we're also representing events, then the circle would be the best way to represent a human being, right? It's like looking from above and seeing that little dot is a human being. If you think about a square, we can use that because it's not a natural shape, it's more like a mechanical shape, we can use it for events. So here's where you start developing your visual language. One is human, the other one is an event. So you start coding your information into the graphics. The other thing would be thinking about design principles and how you can create these visuals using those different principles. So if you think about density, if you're thinking about, let's say, cycles, and you have a cycle that repeats itself but in certain areas is more dense than others, then thinking about a graphic, one graphic that repeats itself, where we can visualize the pattern of frequency or occurrence of that cycle. Also scale. So if something's bigger than the others, you have to make sure that you understand that if you're talking about humans and all these represent humans, the change of scale also means something. So you also have to pay attention to scale, proximity, how close to each other are, what's the relationship between these graphics. If you create density in one area and in another area there's a lot of space, what does that mean? Because that also adds to the story, okay? So it's important to define the story in a way that it defines the different graphics that you use. So in this section, you learn about the structure of infographics. Just keep in mind that it's important that you need to first analyze the information that you want to visualize. So the information is the one that defines the structure that you're going to create. Sometimes we're drawn to certain structures and we start sketching those as opposed to starting with the information. So it's always important to first analyze your information, find the patterns, and define the story that you want to tell. And that is what's going to define the structure that you end up using.